Imagine a nation that has endured revolution, war, famine, and political upheaval, only to rise time and again to redefine itself. This is Russia, a country where resilience is woven into the fabric of its identity. Join me as we uncover the fascinating story of Russia's transformation over the 20th century, a journey of hardship, innovation, and boundless spirit. The last days of empire, 1900 to 1917. The dawn of the 20th century found Russia as one of Europe's great empires, yet one deeply divided. Under Tsar Nicholas II, the Russian Empire stretched across a vast expanse, but its people faced crushing poverty, political repression, and a growing demand for change. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 was a humiliating defeat, shaking the foundations of imperial pride and highlighting the empire's vulnerabilities. The Revolution of 1905 brought the first sparks of rebellion, as workers, peasants, and intellectuals demanded reform, forcing the Tsar to establish a weak and contentious Duma, or parliament. Even with these attempts at reform, the monarchy clung to its autocratic traditions, creating a ticking time bomb of discontent across the empire. Growing unrest among the working class, military defeats in World War I, and the disconnect between the royal family and the Russian people laid the groundwork for revolution. Russia was a giant with feet of clay, standing on the brink of monumental change. Revolution and the Soviet dawn, 1917 to 1930s. In 1917, the Russian Revolution changed the course of history. The abdication of Nicholas II marked the end of the Romanov dynasty, while the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power in the October Revolution. Amid the chaos of civil war between the Red Army and the White Forces, Lenin proclaimed a new era of socialism, promising peace, land, and bread to the people. But the dream came at a cost. The Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1923, left millions dead and the economy in ruins. Lenin's policies, including the controversial New Economic Policy, NEP, allowed limited private enterprise to revive the economy, creating a fragile balance between ideology and necessity. After Lenin's death in 1924, the stage was set for Joseph Stalin's rise to power. Stalin's brutal industrialization campaigns and collectivization of agriculture transformed the Soviet Union into a global power, but at the expense of millions of lives lost to famine, purges, and forced labor camps. Amidst the pain, the Soviet Union's rapid transformation stunned the world, proving its ability to shape a new global order despite internal devastation. It was a time of high ideals and harsh realities, where the promise of a workers' utopia was overshadowed by immense human suffering. World War II and the Great Patriotic War, 1941 to 1945. When Nazi Germany invaded in 1941, the Soviet Union faced its greatest existential threat. Known in Russia as the Great Patriotic War, the conflict devastated the country but also showcased its resilience. Cities like Leningrad endured a 900-day siege, while battles such as Stalingrad and Moscow turned the tide against Hitler. By 1945, Soviet forces marched into Berlin, raising the red flag over the Reichstag and solidifying the USSR's role as a superpower. The human cost was staggering. Over 20 million lives were lost, leaving scars that would linger for generations. Yet out of this tragedy, a deep sense of national pride emerged. Victory Day became a sacred occasion to honor the bravery and sacrifices of the Soviet people. The war also spurred industrial and military innovation as the USSR mobilized on an unprecedented scale, laying the groundwork for its post-war strength. This victory reshaped Europe's map and marked the Soviet Union's rise as a dominant global power, setting the stage for its Cold War rivalry with the West. The legacy of the Great Patriotic War remains a defining moment in Russian history, symbolizing resilience and unity. Even today, the memory of those sacrifices serves as a source of national pride and identity, deeply woven into the fabric of Russian culture. The Cold War and space race, 1945 to 1960s. The post-war years saw the Soviet Union locked in a tense ideological standoff with the United States, the Cold War. This era was defined by the race for technological and military dominance. In 1957, the USSR shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, igniting the space race. 4 years later, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to journey into space, a moment of immense pride for the Soviet people and a testament to the nation's ingenuity and ambition. At home, however, life was complex. While the USSR's scientific achievements garnered global acclaim, the repressive policies of the Stalinist era cast a long shadow. The death of Stalin in 1953 marked a turning point, with Nikita Khrushchev's de-Stalinization campaign bringing limited reforms and a thaw in cultural expression. Writers like Alexander Solzhenitsyn exposed the horrors of the Gulag, challenging the government's narrative even as it sought to maintain control. Khrushchev's leadership also saw bold but risky moves, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Stagnation and descent, 1970s, 1980s. The 1970s brought stability, but also stagnation under Leonid Brezhnev's leadership. The Soviet economy, reliant on heavy industry and centralized planning, struggled to innovate, while corruption and inefficiency grew. The war in Afghanistan, beginning in 1979, further drained resources and morale, earning the nickname the Soviet Vietnam. Despite the challenges, Soviet culture continued to thrive. The underground music and art scenes blossomed, with rock bands and dissident writers pushing the boundaries of censorship. Meanwhile, the Soviet people found small joys in communal living, sports, and the achievements of cosmonauts, even as they questioned the future of their nation. The era was defined by both quiet resilience and growing dissatisfaction, as whispers of change began to echo across the USSR. The cracks in the system became increasingly visible. Dissidents like Andrei Sakharov and Alexander Solzhenitsyn boldly criticized the regime, demanding greater freedoms and transparency. International pressures, including US-led economic sanctions and the arms race, further strained the Soviet economy. By the early 1980s, the once mighty USSR appeared to be faltering, setting the stage for the transformative leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev and the sweeping reforms that would follow. Perestroika, glasnost, and collapse, 1880s to 1991. In the 1880s, Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness, aimed to revitalize the Soviet Union. These reforms brought greater transparency and economic experimentation, but also exposed deep systemic issues. Nationalist movements in the Baltic states and other regions gained momentum, challenging the USSR's unity. The Chernobyl disaster in 1986 symbolized the failures of the Soviet system, while the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 signaled the end of the Cold War. By 1991, the Soviet Union had dissolved, leaving Russia to grapple with its new identity in a rapidly changing world. For millions of citizens, the collapse brought a mix of relief and uncertainty, as decades of ideology unraveled in the blink of an eye. The end of the USSR marked not just a geopolitical shift, but the dawn of a new, uncharted era for Russia, full of promise and peril. As the world watched, Russia faced the monumental task of rebuilding its society, economy, and place on the global stage. The turbulent transition, 1990s to 2000, post-Soviet Russia faced immense challenges. Under Boris Yeltsin, the 1990s were marked by economic collapse, corruption, and political instability. Privatization created a new class of oligarchs, while ordinary citizens struggled to adapt to the hardships of a market economy. The Chechen Wars further tested the nation's resolve, bringing conflict to its doorstep. Yet, this period also saw a cultural resurgence. Russian filmmakers, musicians, and writers embraced new freedoms, producing works that explored the complexities of post-Soviet life. These creative voices captured the pain and hope of a society in flux, grappling with the loss of a superpower identity and the birth of a new, uncertain reality. By the end of the decade, Vladimir Putin's rise to power signaled a new era, one promising stability, but also raising questions about the future of democracy in Russia. Amidst the upheaval, the Russian people demonstrated an enduring ability to adapt and survive, keeping alive the spirit of hope for a brighter future. Russia's 20th century was a tale of extremes: tragedy and triumph, oppression and innovation, despair and resilience. Through revolutions, wars, and rebuilding, the Russian people have endured and adapted, their spirit unbroken. What can we learn from Russia's story? Perhaps it's the power of resilience, the importance of hope, and the ability to rebuild even in the face of immense adversity. As we reflect on Russia's past, we are reminded of the profound strength it takes to navigate a century of change and emerge with an identity uniquely your own. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Russian history. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to History Through Ages for more captivating stories from around the globe.